Welcome to Rich Conversations. Let's talk about the album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles, the greatest band of all time. And so this album came out in 1967. Some background information. The Beatles were the biggest thing in the world. They were this phenomenon and this cultural force and really an economy of their own. And so every time they played somewhere, there would just be so much chaos and mania, right? And pretty soon, it got to be too much. The Beatles are the pioneers of so many different things, and one of those is really like stadium concerts, right? There's such a high demand for the Beatles. They put them in these stadiums, and then so the security, they're just figuring all this stuff out, right? Anybody who's trying to get their message out for anything, whether it's a protest or it just became this just headache of touring and traveling. But as a musician during that time in the 60s, that's what you did to make money as a band, right? Sure, you could sell records and albums, and the Beatles were really they were so good. They were at this genius level. So before the Beatles, it was you'd sell singles, and then the Beatles came along and all their singles were really good, and they put them on one album, and people would be like, why are you selling this as an album? And they're like, well, why not? And then they just keep making more and more and more, right? They're playing all these shows. It gets to be such a headache where, they're catching flack from ambassadors in other countries like the Philippines for not taking the time to meet with them when they're just kids in their early 20s, early 20-somethings, and they just want to rest or, just do something with their free time, right? So then what happens? They decide to stop touring. Again, this is how you made money, is to tour, right? And so they just go silent, just silent. They don't really, everybody kind of does their own thing. They kind of go off in their own directions. But you didn't hear anything from the Beatles for 3 or 4 months, I want to say. And everybody is writing these articles like, what are the Beatles up to? Are they washed up? Because, again, at this time, if you're not playing, you're probably not going to make it, right? But the Beatles instead were just working. The idea was, we're not going to play live anymore. So we're going to create an album that can't be performed live. They really ramped up what they were doing with their experimenting in the studio and recording sounds that no one's ever heard of on especially a pop album. So they're just trying all these different things because you have 4 tracks. Now today with digital technology, you can have hundreds of tracks, right? But they were working with 4. And before this album, on these tracks, you're gonna record the guitar, the bass, the drums, the singer, the vocals, right? But they would always be tinkering with this stuff. And so they're just working quietly. They're just doing their thing, creating Sgt. Pepper's. And then when it comes out in May 1967, it just blows people's minds. They had never heard anything like this on a rock album before or a pop album. And it just totally changed the music industry, how you record, what was possible, and it's considered the greatest rock album of all time. So why am I bringing up this album, right? Last year, March 2020. This is March 14th. COVID is happening. I'm here in Chicago, and I'm starting to see kind of the writing on the wall, right? Things are going to be on lockdown, and life as we kind of know it is going to be different for the foreseeable future, indefinitely, right? And I thought back to Sgt. Pepper's and that story of how they're the biggest thing, and it's just energy, always on the go, always doing this, that, and that appearance, and then they just chill for a little bit, right? And they go dark, they go silent, and they eventually came out with the greatest album of all time. Just because your circumstances change, right, in life, doesn't change your purpose or your work and what you're trying to accomplish, your dreams, right? I was very fortunate that a lot of the things we talk about on the podcast, reflection, habits, meditation, journaling, philosophy, just work ethic, all these things I had been doing and practicing a year and a half, 2 years before COVID. You know, you prepare for this type of situation where something extreme happens, and it's all about how you adapt, right? And we also talk about, you know, history and perspective on this podcast. So zooming out, COVID is one of the most unique times in human history. But it's not the sole unique time in history, right? If we zoom out, we can see all these different times on the human story, right? And what were those people doing then, right? You had to adapt, you had to change. Just because it's happening, it doesn't mean you shut down. So we still have to keep that focus and drive forward. So I've been thinking a lot about mental toughness. And so 2020, I just listened to Sgt. Pepper's all the time. All the time. I'm listening to Sgt. Pepper's to keep reminding me this. And also, it's an awesome album. So that and Bone Lane's Saintmaker. That's like all I listened to in 2020. Time reveals how you spend it. So for the rest of my life and the rest of your life, we are going to be asked how you spent 2020. What was that year like for you, right? You better have a good story, right? Or you want to have something to show for it. So like the Beatles during this period of silence, right? They came out, they were working out the greatest album of all time. So when we talk about mental toughness is about understanding that you're going to experience negativity, adversity, and just unpleasantness, discomfort, but it's about focusing on your purpose or focusing on the task, focusing on your job, and performing at a high level regardless of all these external factors, right? So during this whole year, that's what I did, and that's what my creative partner and roommate, Ken Ferguson, also did. And we've been doing this every single day, just working on our craft, working on everything, because we know that by thinking about time and reflecting on eventually we're going to get through this, you better have something to show for it, right? So we've been taking this time to really create our Sgt. Peppers, right? While it's been tough, we're very grateful that we did do this and we did take on this mindset because we're so much farther ahead than if it hadn't. And I think there's going to be a lot of stories like this coming out, right? But this upcoming week, Ken and I are going to be in Miami taking a vacation. A vacation. Who would have thought a vacation might do some good, right? So we're going to Miami, Florida. And I'm so curious about Miami because I'm just so fascinated about like regional cultures and how, like say the Beatles, they came from Liverpool, and geography often shapes culture. So Liverpool is on the west side of England, and during this time they're a port. So all the rock and roll records from America, they're coming through Liverpool first. So the Beatles are getting their hands on these records first. So Miami is this cultural hub in the Caribbean, and it's this international feel, and the art and the architecture and the people and the food. I'm just so curious and so excited to just be walking around. The Beatles were in Miami too. They met Muhammad Ali there. He was Cassius Clay at the time. Well, I hope that you've spent this time creating your own Sgt. Peppers and understanding that creating habits that you do on a daily basis, they do add up over time. And by putting in the work and not losing focus of what you're trying to do just because external circumstances have changed, you'll come out with your Sgt. Peppers, your version of Sgt. Peppers. And the world is going to be so much better when you do, because we're all here and we need to realize our potential because it elevates both yourself and your communities. And if we do that more collectively and collaboratively, we're going to make a better world.